have a question for you because you were at Notre Dame during the Charlie Weis to Brian Kelly regime change. And there were times when Brian Kelly said, he made a comment about my guys, which was kind of not taken well. And there were players that Weis recruited that kind of went to Weis when they had problems. And then, there were certain things that happen when a coach takes over and there's kind of a hostile takeover there. Like, how did the team navigate that? I know it took a while for the team to actually win, more than 10 games a season after Kelly took over. But how did the chemistry work out between his recruits and Weis's recruits?
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't like any chemistry between recruits, but there is that like acute awareness of being treated like a hand-me-down or feeling like you're a hand-me-down or that you're not wanted, which is like, the ironic part is when you look at the team in 12 that actually ended up going to the title, there were a lot of guys that were holdovers from our recruiting classes under Charlie Weis that were really integral parts of that roster as a veteran. And so that is the challenge for the coaching staff because you got to think they're trying to come in and preach the message that Mike talked about, right? Where you're trying to set this new foundation and you've got a way of doing things. To Mike's point about Mario, that was the same with Brian, where the biggest advantage he had was coming in and knowing what he wanted right away and knowing how to lay that groundwork the way you did everything day to day, the way you organized a locker, the way you organized an off-season program, the way you organized, the way you went about coaching and acquiring talent. But there is that fine line of also having to bridge the gap and in a limited time, be able to figure out who the leaders on your team are. And I think that's the other tough part is when you come in as a coaching staff, what you see in the offseason program and then what you get when football starts being played are two very different things. Like the guys that pop in shirts and shorts are not always the guys that are going to pop once you put pads on and you figure all that out. And even in spring ball, it's not a perfect look or a perfect summary of what the player is going to be like that. And so I think it takes you a little while to kind of learn the leaders and learn the important people on your team. And that could be some of the disconnect for any coaching staff going in. It's why when you look at what Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame did in his example, he'd been in the locker room for 11 months prior to taking that head coaching job. He knew the pulse of that team. He knew the leaders of that team. He knew he could go to in that locker room. And to have that locker room already have such a strong foundation anyway was I think a big part of why they were able to turn things around really quickly. And for Mario, you are trying to come in and identify who are my leaders, who are also my best players, and do that on the fly as you go through a season where you're an imperfect football team and an imperfect roster.
Yeah, it allowed for people on the roster to ascend and succeed on the field. Cam Kinchins became a first-team All-American. I would say, as you're seeing players leave Brian Kelly's LSU because after a season they realized it didn't work. And I've had these discussions with several former players, no one really from this new transfer era, and their perspective is always fresh and deeply appreciated, and it's always coming from the perspective of someone that toughed it out, made it work, assimilated to a new way of doing things, and has a good story to tell. I would just counter that always, and they always heard me respectfully that it's a totally different time now. You would have been far more likely to check out if you realized that you could leave and not have to sit out a year. If you had that portal that was so accessible to you, if you were being tampered with the way that players are being tampered with now that the portal is one time, guilt-free, no penalty, you don't have to sit, you have a locker room full of people that check out, and you don't have the buy-in for someone to actually, because you don't have the sitting out a year to hold over them, you have people that are just deucing on an entire season and being negative forces there. So a bad season can turn even worse in this era.
Yeah, that's the one thing and you're right, that I couldn't account for, because even in our locker room, like if there were guys that didn't like how they were treated by that staff versus how they had been treated by the prior staff, because the hierarchy completely changes. Like when I was getting ready to, so my sophomore year was 2009, when Charlie Weis was still the head coach and our offensive line coach at the time. He and I really saw eye to eye. I had done really well under him. And the talk going into that spring was, all right, you're going to have a chance to compete for the starting job. Like you're going to be one of the guys that we roll out there. And then all of a sudden you fast forward and new staff comes in, completely reshakes the pecking order. And now all of a sudden, not as much in that kind of conversation. Now, extrapolate that out to 100+ guys on a roster who aren't being told what they like. But back then, if you sat, you either had to go, if you transferred, you either had to go down a level or sit. So we didn't really have that many guys jump ship. And part of that is, part of the early message, it was easy to buy in on with Brian Kelly. Like, he got things done for us training table wise, moving study hall, like all the little things around a program that you see coaches try and tinker with when they come in, especially now, because so many of these top end programs are so better resourced that they can provide some of the things you may not have been getting under the prior staff, or hitting the right buttons there that play with, fan base, alumni, and all that stuff. So it does make it enticing to stay, because there is some sort of hope within there. But now when you've got all these other options, and to Mike's point, all these other suitors and other players, they're going to do that. Like, I think that's probably going to be the biggest thing as people talk about, the recruiting that Jimbo Fisher and other people kind of brought up, or that, people got, no, it wasn't Jimbo Fisher. It was at Pitt. Getting angry about people recruiting other players. That's going to happen on the player level for a long time. Like, that's going to be the thing that's impossible to
at
track.
An unprecedented level right now. And you have players already planning their exit that are just sticking around because they know they can leave penalty free. And you have bad agents that can work against a coach that's so reliant on culture. It's just a different era now when you don't have the penalty of having to sit out a year.
The wild thing to me, though, Gojo, is how some of these coaches succeeded in year one. Lincoln Riley was able to bring his quarterback, but you talk about Brian Kelly. He won the SEC West in year one, which is insane considering it's the SEC West. What do you think allows him to have success in a place like LSU where maybe Mario Cristobal failed?
Well, I think it's interesting to look generally at a lot of the first-year coaches that succeeded, because I think a lot of those places, when you walk into, and usually is the case, like I look at Oregon, you walk into veteran offensive lines and you get a veteran quarterback that tends to raise the ceiling on it. With Mario, that's going to be one of the toughest parts about Miami, is remaking it in his mind up in the trenches, because that's what can instantly raise the floor of your football team. But for Brian, it's interesting. I always said the best thing that he did was understand where his feet are. You look going back to, from Grand Valley to Central Michigan to Cincinnati to Notre Dame, different resources available to you everywhere. Like, he didn't have an O-line and a tight end room that were chock full the way he did at Notre Dame. So he had a bunch of freakish receiver talent and a quarterback that was a really strong dual threat that was kind of able to bridge them until that quarterback figured out how to get those receivers the ball. And then defensively, Brian's got more talent on this team probably overall than he ever had with us at Notre Dame, top to bottom. I mean, that's just how that LSU program recruits itself, basically, at this point. So he's always been a really good coach. Whatever people's misgivings with him have been along the way, the guy can coach football, and he's been handed a cupboard with a ton of talent that's right in his backyard that I was not surprised he made work sooner than later. That was the least surprising thing to me, was that he figured it out. Now, the fact that it happened to work enough to get him to the SEC championship game is partially circumstance, but a lot of it is great coaching and great players. Like, football's a simple formula.